Hello Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. We probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today's topic is the fourth battle in the Wars of Beleriand, Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame. The conflict that flipped the balance of power for the next 100 years of Middle-earth's history. I'll put links in the description to the videos covering the other battles, but just to bring us up to speed. In the year 60 of the First Age, Morgoth launches a massive offensive that goes horribly wrong. Hoping to catch the elves off guard, he finds instead that King Fingolfin and the eldest son of Feanor, Maedhros, are ready for him. The result is Dagor Aglareb, the glorious battle. An overwhelming victory for the good guys. That initiates the Siege of Angband, which lasts for hundreds of years. During that time, Morgoth unsuccessfully tries to break the siege with orcs, and finally learns the lesson that orcs versus Noldor is a lopsided mismatch. So, enter Glaurung, father of dragons. 200 years into the siege, a young, not fully grown Glaurung attacks the siege lines, does some damage, but is ultimately defeated and forced to flee back to Angband by Fingolfin's son, Fingon, and his mounted archers. And then Angband goes eerily quiet. One major tactical problem with the siege is that it's not complete. They can't encircle the entire fortress. Morgoth's forces are free to come and go through the north. Knowing that this pseudo-siege can't ultimately do its job, Fingolfin considers an assault on Angband. That is notable, because up until now, and as it happens in this upcoming fourth battle, Morgoth has always been the aggressor. The elves have never attacked first. Fingolfin is going to try to change that. And this quote from chapter 18 of the Silmarillion mentions Angrod and Aignor. These are brothers of Galadriel, so top-tier elven nobility. And they jointly control the realm of Dorthonion, which is on the front lines of the siege. Silmarillion, chapter 18. Now Fingolfin, king of the north, not that king of the north, and high king of the Noldor, seeing that his people would become numerous and strong, and that the men allied to them were many and valiant, pondered once more an assault upon Angband. For he knew that they lived in danger while the circle of the siege was incomplete, and Morgoth was free to labor in his deep mines, devising what evils none could foretell ere he should reveal them. This counsel was wise, according to the measure of his knowledge, for the Noldor did not yet comprehend the fullness of the power of Morgoth, nor understand that their unaided war upon him was without final hope, whether they hasted or delayed. But because the land was fair and their kingdoms wide, most of the Noldor were content with things as they were, trusting them to last, and slow to begin an assault in which many must surely perish, were it in victory or in defeat. Therefore, they were little disposed to hearken to Fingolfin and the sons of Feanor, at that time least of all. Among the chieftains of the Noldor, Angrod and Aignor alone were of like mind with the king, for they dwelt in regions whence Thangorodrim could be descried, and the threat of Morgoth was present to their thought. Thus, the designs of Fingolfin came to naught, and the land had peace yet, for a while. So that's an interesting question. If the elves had followed Fingolfin's advice and attacked Angband instead of simply laying siege, would they have fared better in the end? And that passage suggests that the answer is no. The quote reads, "Their unaided war upon him was without final hope, whether they hasted or delayed." So perhaps the siege was in fact the better strategy. At least I got 400 years of peace out of it. But inevitably, the clock finally strikes midnight on the Noldor. All of these quotes are from chapter 18 of the Silmarillion. It being then 400 years and 55 since the coming of Fingolfin, The evil befell that he had long dreaded, and yet more dire and sudden than his darkest fear. For Morgoth had long prepared his force in secret, while ever the malice of his heart grew greater, and his hatred of the Noldor more bitter. And he desired not only to end his foes, but to destroy also and defile the lands that they had taken and made fair. And it is said that his hate overcame his counsel, so that if he had but endured to wait longer, until his designs were full, then the Noldor would have perished utterly. But on his part, he esteemed too lightly the valor of the elves, and of men he took yet no account. It's interesting that Morgoth is described as impatient, having waited 400 years to attack. But that is a fairly small amount of time in his lifespan. If he had waited a bit longer to further increase the strength of his army, he might have ended the Noldor right there. But he underestimates the Noldor, and that last line is really intriguing. Of men he took yet no account. Hasn't given him a thought. That's going to change, obviously. One pivotal development that's occurred during this siege is that alliances have been forged between elves and men, particularly through the elves Fingolfin and Finrod. Finrod being the most well-known of Galadriel's brothers. I've done a video on Finrod if you're interested. But this impressive collection of heroes is about to meet their match. Here is a description of Dagor Bragollach. There came a time of winter, when night was dark and without moon, and the wide plain of Ardgallen stretched dim beneath the cold stars, from the hill forts of the Noldor to the feet of Thangorodrim. The watchfires burned low, and the guards were few. On the plain few were waking in the camps of the horsemen of Hithlum. Then suddenly Morgoth sent forth great rivers of flame that ran down swifter than balrogs from Thangorodrim, and poured over all the plain. And the mountains of iron belched forth fires of many poisonous hues, and the fume of them stank upon the air and was deadly. Thus Ardgallen perished, and fire devoured its grasses, and it became a burned and desolate waste, full of a choking dust, barren and lifeless. Thereafter its name was changed, and it was called Anfauglith, the gasping dust. Many charred bones had there their roofless grave, for many of the Noldor perished in that burning, who were caught by the running flame and could not fly to the hills. The heights of Dorthonion and arid Wethrin held back the fiery torrents, but their woods upon the slopes that looked towards Angband were all kindled, and the smoke wrought confusion among the defenders. Thus began the fourth of the great battles, Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame. In the front of that fire came Glaurung the Golden, father of dragons, in his full might, and in his train were Balrogs, and behind them came the black armies of the orcs in multitudes such as the Noldor had never before seen or imagined. And they assaulted the fortresses of the Noldor, and broke the leaguer about Angband, and slew wherever they found them the Noldor and their allies, grey elves and men. Many of the stoutest of the foes of Morgoth were destroyed in the first days of that war, bewildered and dispersed, and unable to muster their strength. War ceased not wholly ever again in Beleriand, but the Battle of Sudden Flame is held to have ended with the coming of spring, when the onslaught of Morgoth grew less. Thus ended the siege of Angband, and the foes of Morgoth were scattered and sundered, one from another. So just an explosion of terrifying violence that overwhelms the elves. Morgoth starts with volcanic eruptions, sending lava south over the plain of Ardgallen, all the way down to Dorthonion, where Galadriel's brothers, Angrod and Aignor, live. And while the fires are still burning, the smoke's hanging in the air, the good guys are hit with a trifecta of a full-grown fire-breathing dragon, Balrogs, and the largest army of orcs ever assembled to that date. It's not even a contest. Noldor elves, grey elves, and men fall like kindling. It's a devastating loss. The sons of Finarfin bore most heavily the brunt of the assault, and Angrod and Aignor were slain. Beside them fell Bregalas, lord of the house of Beor, and a great part of the warriors of that people. But Barahir, the brother of Bragollach, was in the fighting further westward, near the pass of Syrian. There King Finrod Felagund, hastening from the south, was cut off from his people and surrounded with small company in the fen of Serech. And he would have been slain or taken, but Barahir came up with the bravest of his men and rescued him, made a wall of spears about him, and they cut their way out of the battle with great loss. Thus Felagund escaped and returned to his deep fortress of Nargothrond. But he swore an oath of abiding friendship and aid in every need to Barahir and all his kin, and in token of his vow he gave to Barahir his ring. Barahir was now by right lord of the house of Beor, and he returned to Dorthonion. But most of his people fled from their homes and took refuge in the fastness of Hithlum. This moment of heroism is perhaps the one bright spot in this battle. Finrod's brothers, Angrod and Eignor, have been killed. And elsewhere, Finrod is about to be slain as well, but he's saved by a group of men led by Barahir. As Tolkien writes, they save Finrod's life with great loss. He recognizes their sacrifice on his behalf, so he swears an oath and he gives Barahir his ring. That ring, known as the Ring of Barahir, is the same ring that finds its way to Aragorn thousands of years later in the Third Age. As we know, oaths are never made lightly in Tolkien's mythology. And as a result of that oath, Finrod eventually gives up his kingship, duels Sauron, and later dies saving the life of Barahir's son, Beren, as told in the tale of Beren and Luthien. I should note that Finrod is re-embodied to blissfully spend his days back in the West. But the quest of Beren and Luthien would have turned out much differently if Barahir hadn't saved Finrod during the Battle of Sudden Flame. Elsewhere, the battle continues to go poorly. So great was the onslaught of Morgoth that Fingolfin and Fingon could not come to the aid of the sons of Finarfin, and the hosts of Hithlum were driven back with great loss. Before the walls of Ithel Sirion fell Hador the Golden-Haired, defending the rear guard of his lord Fingolfin, being then 66 years of age. And with him fell Gundor, his younger son, pierced with many arrows, and they were mourned by the elves. Then Galdor the Tall took the lordship of his father, and because of the strength and height of the shadowy mountains, which withstood the torrent of fire, and by the valor of the elves and the men of the north, which neither Orc nor Balrog could yet overcome, Hithlum remained unconquered, a threat upon the flank of Morgoth's attack. But Fingolfin was sundered from his kinsmen by a sea of foes. For the war had gone ill with the sons of Feanor, and well nigh all the east marches were taken by assault. Maedhros did deeds of surpassing valor, and the orcs fled before his face, for since his torment upon Thangorodrim his spirit burned like a white fire within, and he was as one that returns from the dead. Thus the great fortress upon the hill of Himring could not be taken, and many of the most valiant that remained, both of the people of Dorthonion and of the east marches, rallied there to Maedhros. And for a while he closed once more the pass of Aglon, so that the orcs could not enter Beleriand by that road. But they overwhelmed the riders of the people of Feanor, for Glaurung came thither, and destroyed all the land between the arms of Gelion, the river. And the orcs ravaged the land of Caranthir, and they defiled Lake Helivorn. Thence they passed over Gelion with fire and terror, and came far into East Beleriand. So in that passage we first see fighting on the borders of Hithlum. And Hithlum defies the odds and survives the battle, largely due to the efforts of the men of the north. And much like Barahir's actions in this battle, saving Finrod, dramatically changing the trajectory of his house, here we see Hador and his family's actions changing the trajectory of their house. Hador and his son Gundor die heroically defending Fingolfin. So these friendships that Fingolfin and Finrod fostered with humans really paid off in this battle. Leadership of their house then falls to Hador's oldest son, Galdor the Tall. And Galdor is the father of two of the Edain's greatest heroes, Húrin, and Huor. So a valiant stand for the good guys in Hithlum. But in the east, it's an almost total loss. The sons of Feanor take a beating, the one exception being Maedhros, and his fortress, Himring, withstands the assault. A lot of defeated folks show up at his door. And now we come to the biggest loss for the Noldor in this battle. Much like the Noldor lost their king Feanor at the end of the second battle, they're about to lose their current king, Fingolfin, at the end of the fourth battle. I've done a video about Fingolfin and his downfall, and I've read the same passage that I'm about to read here, but it's very relevant to the Battle of Sudden Flame. And frankly, if I was going to reread any text from the Silmarillion, it would be this duel between Fingolfin and Morgoth. The greatest one-on-one duel in Tolkien's mythology, hands down. Fingolfin is overcome with grief at the suffering of his people, and that grief is turned to anger. And he decides to go out in a blaze of glory. Damn near pulls it off. Now news came to Hithlum that Dorthonion was lost, and the sons of Finarfin overthrown, and that the sons of Feanor were driven from their lands. Then Fingolfin beheld, as it seemed to him, the utter ruin of the Noldor, and the defeat beyond redress of all their houses. And filled with wrath and despair, he mounted upon Rockalor, his great horse, and rode forth alone, and none might restrain him. All that beheld his onset fled in amaze, thinking that Orome himself was come, for a great madness of rage was upon him, so that his eyes shone like the eyes of the Valar. Thus he came alone to Angband's gates, and he sounded his horn and smote once more upon the brazen doors, and challenged Morgoth to come forth to single combat. And Morgoth came. That was the last time in those wars that he passed the doors of his stronghold, and it is said that he took not the challenge willingly, for though his might was greatest of all things in this world, alone of the Valar, he knew fear. But he could not now deny the challenge before the face of his captains, for the rocks rang with the shrill music of Fingolfin's horn, and his voice came keen and clear down into the depths of Angband. And Fingolfin named Morgoth Craven, and Lord of Slaves. Therefore Morgoth came, climbing slowly from his subterranean throne, and the rumor of his feet was like thunder underground. And he issued forth clad in black armor, and he stood before the king like a tower, iron-crowned, and his vast shield, sable, unblazoned, cast a shadow over him like a storm cloud. But Fingolfin gleamed beneath it as a star, for his mail was overlaid with silver, and his blue shield was set with crystals, and he drew his sword Ringil that glittered like ice. Then Morgoth hurled aloft Grond, the hammer of the underworld, and swung it down like a bolt of thunder. But Fingolfin sprang aside, and Grond rent a mighty pit in the earth, whence smoke and fire darted. Many times Morgoth essayed to smite him, and each time Fingolfin leaped away, as a lightning shoots from under a dark cloud, and he wounded Morgoth with 7 wounds, and 7 times Morgoth gave a cry of anguish, whereat the hosts of Angband fell upon their faces in dismay, and the cries echoed in the Northlands. But at the last the king grew weary, and Morgoth bore down his shield upon him. Thrice he was crushed to his knees, and thrice rose again, and bore up his broken shield and stricken helm. But the earth was all rent and pitted about him, and he stumbled and fell backward before the feet of Morgoth. And Morgoth set his left foot upon his neck, and the weight of it was like a fallen hill. Yet with his last and desperate stroke, Fingolfin hewed the foot with Ringil, and the blood gushed forth black and smoking, and filled the pits of Grond. Thus died Fingolfin, High King of the Noldor, most proud and valiant of the elven kings of old. The orcs made no boast of that duel at the gate, neither do the elves sing of it, for their sorrow is too deep. Yet the tale of it is remembered still, for Thorondor, king of eagles, brought the tidings to Gondolin, and to Hithlum afar off. Great was the lamentation in Hithlum when the fall of Fingolfin became known. And Fingon, in sorrow, took the lordship of the house of Fingolfin and the kingdom of the Noldor. But his young son, Irenion, who was after named Gil-galad, he sent to the Havens. Now that's the way you write fantasy prose. That passage has everything. The lore, the stakes, the emotional weight, the violence, the consequence of that violence. It's brilliant. And that final blow that Fingolfin delivers to Morgoth's foot is a permanent injury. Morgoth walks with a limp for the rest of the First Age. And it's notable that there are no songs about this duel, even from the side that won. And now the Noldor have lost their siege of 400 years, lost much of their land, and lost their king. Fingolfin's son, Fingon, becomes the new king. Why not Maedhros, eldest son of Fëanor? Because remember, after Fingolfin rescued Maedhros, saving his life, sometime after the second battle, Maedhros passed the title of kingship to Fingolfin and his heirs. Notice that line at the end. We see that Fingon sends a young Gil-galad to the Havens of Fallas for safety. The Battle of Sudden Flame has made the elves realize how at risk they are. Eventually, the Havens aren't safe either, but for now, they'll do. There's some discrepancy in Tolkien's notes about who Gil-galad's father is. Here, it's written that Gil-galad's father is Fingon. Elsewhere, we're told that Orodreth, Fingon's nephew, is Gil-galad's father. His name's going to come up in the next quote. But either way, young Gil-galad is sent to the Havens, where he'll come under the protection of Círdan, who has already lived a long life at this point. I think it's safe to say that Círdan mentors Gil-galad. And here we see the start of a friendship that lasts for thousands of years. Through Gil-galad eventually becoming the High King of the Noldor, all the way to the end of the Second Age, when Gil-galad falls during the War of the Last Alliance. Their respect for each other and cooperation saves the legacy of the elves probably more than once. And their relationship begins here, in the aftermath of the Battle of Sudden Flame. It'll be 17 years until the fifth battle in the Wars of Beleriand, but like previous battles, there are some notable skirmishes that occur in between battles that don't quite warrant their own number. In this case, we've got two such skirmishes. The first, which we'll call Battle 4.1, occurs 2 years after Dagor Bragollach, and it involves a familiar name, Sauron. For nigh on 2 years after the Dagor Bragollach, the Noldor still defended the western pass about the sources of Sirion, for the power of Ulmo was in that water, and Minas Tirith withstood the orcs. But at length, after the fall of Fingolfin, Sauron, greatest and most terrible of the servants of Morgoth, came against Orodreth, the warden of the tower upon Tol Sirion. Sauron was become now a sorcerer of dreadful power, master of shadows and of phantoms, foul in wisdom, cruel in strength, misshaping what he touched, twisting what he ruled, lord of werewolves. His dominion was torment. He took Minas Tirith by assault, for a dark cloud of fear fell upon those that defended it, and Orodreth was driven out and fled to Nargothrond. Then Sauron made it into a watchtower for Morgoth, a stronghold of evil and a menace. And the fair isle of Tol Sirion became accursed, and it was called Tol in Gauroth, the Isle of Werewolves. Gotta love the Isle of Werewolves. I'll just say, it doesn't sound like the kind of place you want to take the family on vacation. Hey, the Isle of Werewolves. I'd like the quick reference to the power of Ulmo in the water, suggesting he's lending aid to the good guys, as we know he does at other occasions. But this is a big victory for Sauron and Morgoth. They've taken a geographically significant location and driven off the elves. But the good guys fare better in what we'll call Battle 4.2, 7 years after Dagor Bragollach. When 7 years had passed since the fourth battle, Morgoth renewed his assault, and he sent a great force against Hithlum. The attack on the passes of the shadowy mountains was bitter, and in the siege of Ithel Sirion, Galdor the Tall, lord of Dor-lomin, was slain by an arrow. That fortress he held on behalf of Fingon the High King. And in that same place his father, Hador Lorindal, died but a little time before. Hurin, his son, was then newly come to manhood, but he was great in strength both of mind and body, and he drove the orcs with heavy slaughter from arid Wethrin. But King Fingon was hard put to it to hold back the army of Angband that came down from the north, and battle was joined upon the very plains of Hithlim. There Fingon was outnumbered, but the ships of Círdan sailed in great strength up the firth of Drengist, and in the hour of need the elves of the Fallis came upon the host of Morgoth from the west. Then the orcs broke and fled, and the Eldar had the victory, and their horsed archers pursued them even into the Iron Mountains. So Hithlim was one of the few realms that withstood the Battle of Sudden Flame. 7 years on, Morgoth wants to crush their resistance, and so sends a massive force to do just that. Galdor is slain, but his son, the legendary Hurin, steps up and wins the day. Things are going to go terribly for him later. He becomes arguably the most tortured individual in Tolkien's mythology. But hey, that's years away at this point. At the moment, it's all smiles for Hurin, no follow-up questions. And King Fingon also gets assistance from Círdan and the Havens. They send ships that flank Morgoth's army from the west. Gil-galad may have still been too young to be a part of that relief effort from the Havens. I should note that a few years after Battle 4.2, Beren and Luthien successfully take back a Silmaril from Morgoth. Now that's going to cause almost as many problems as it fixes, but it's quite notable. And the quest is made all the more difficult by the fact that Sauron has established the Isle of Werewolves. He's going to capture Beren and Finrod and imprison them there. And so, as we approach the fifth battle, even though the balance of power has shifted dramatically in Morgoth's direction, elves and men persist. And they're going to rethink Fingolfin's proposed strategy of an assault on Angband. They dismissed the idea years earlier, but now they're considering going on the offensive for a change. When I say that the battle is known as the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, might give you an idea of how our heroes fare in that conflict. And I'll break it all down in the next installment of Dork Lord of the Rings. Before I go, unfortunately, I have some sad news to impart. This is the first Tolkien video that I've recorded since Kittilor passed away. She was my feline partner in crime for almost 20 years, and really the unofficial mascot of this channel. I mean, other than Paul and myself, I think she had the most guest appearances on these videos, including her last appearance, which was on the recent video I did reading Tolkien's Father Christmas letters. Even when she wasn't on camera, she was 6 inches off to the right. She would sleep here on the desk while I did my videos, and occasionally she would sit up and demand to be petted. So I'd be distracting her while talking to you guys. She had cancer, so it wasn't a surprise, but I still wanted to spend more time with her. And I realize this is more for me than for you, so I appreciate you indulging me in this moment. She was a great friend, and I miss her. But I want to end this on a more positive note. So I've got some silly footage. I don't think it's ever been on the channel before. This was filmed over a decade ago. It was a comedy sketch. These are going to be outtakes from a comedy sketch in which my character is such a nerd that he spends his evening playing Dungeons and Dragons with his cat, which is not that far off from reality. So anyway, enjoy these silly outtakes. I think this really gives a good idea of my relationship with Kittilor. So enjoy. Rest in peace, Kittilor. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead and roll the hit. The orc is wearing leather armor and he's got a shield. Okay, what'd you get? 14, you hit. Okay, cool. Why don't you roll your damage? Just come roll your damage. No, you have to roll damage. It's important for the game. Okay, I can't just make it up. Okay, so roll to hit. The orc, he's wearing leather armor, so he's armor class 5. You want to just go ahead and roll. All right, I'll roll for you. Okay, you rolled a 6 with a, looks like you got +3, a 9. All right, you hit. Do you want to do your damage? Why don't you roll your damage? Okay, I'll go ahead and do the damage. 2. You got 2 points of damage. All right, that's pretty. You don't have to roll that dice yet. You're just rolling this one. So roll initiative. Roll your 6-sided. Okay. Oh, a 4. Nice. Okay. Well, you get initiative. No. You rolled a hit. Okay. Can you see what that dice is? You kind of rolled it kind of far. You don't have to roll initiative again. Okay. And sometimes I feel like we're not communicating here. You did. Oh, a 6. Nice. Okay. Yeah, you win initiative.
Okay.